All right, let's get started for the last panel debate of today. In an event like these, and especially coming after all of these very interesting speeches and panel debates, it's always difficult to add more perspectives or more interesting things, but I think we will manage to send you all home with some insights on how we can successfully improve banking accessibility. And I am joined by four great experts on the topic. Next to me is Sophie Alain de Beauvais, Digital Euro Product Proposition Expert at the European Central Bank. Then Freddy Jusien, Advocacy Lead at Inclusion Europe. Kira Drain, Head of Vulnerability Program at the Allied Irish Banks, apologies. And then last but not least, Benedict Beden Renault, Head of Sustainability for BPCE Payments, a French banking group. Let me perhaps get started right away because we have limited time and I want to give maximum time for the experts to talk. Freddie, let me perhaps start by you. When we talk about best practices, we must perhaps start with the obstacles. What are, in your view, the main challenges that we face when working on banking accessibility in a large way?
So maybe I will start by presenting my organization. So I'm from Inclusion Europe. Inclusion Europe represents people with intellectual disabilities and their families. And there are 20 million people with intellectual disabilities in Europe. So thank you for inviting us in this discussion, which is really important also for people with intellectual disabilities. So I think that the main challenge that we have to keep in mind, and especially some banks, when we think about accessibility of banking services, is to think that banking is not only about money. Banking is about independent living, make your life decisions. It's about starting family projects, paying your friends, receiving your salary on your bank account. This is banking. Banking is inclusion. And 20 millions of people with intellectual disabilities in Europe face some problem when it comes to access to banking services as well. So at Inclusion Europe, we do a survey where we ask our members what are the situations related to the rights and inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in Europe. We don't have a specific question on accessibility of banking services, but many of the challenges that they face are related to that. So, for example, in 11 countries in Europe, legal capacity can be fully removed. In 16 countries, it can be partially removed. And you know what? Without legal capacity, you cannot even create a bank account. You cannot withdraw your money. You cannot manage your money the way you want. I know that this is not related directly to accessibility, but here the message is to say that accessibility is the way to overcome many barriers so you can make your financial decisions. And the discussion of today, it's all about it. And I'm really happy to be invited on behalf of Inclusion Europe to share more about that. So,
thank you. Very interesting. And perhaps Kira, because you work in the practice, and I think that only good intentions just bring you so far. But what needs to be done internally in order to translate efforts into good practices?
Very good. So I work for AIB, one of the main Irish banks, and my role is the customer vulnerability program. So that's really quite wide. It's any customer who needs any kind of additional support to access our services. And I completely agree with Freddie there on the importance of access to finance and control over your bank account to a person's independence and autonomy. Incredibly important. So internally, our basic structure is, first of all, we do a significant amount of training, both for our frontline staff and also throughout the bank. And the point being made earlier about the need to embed accessibility thinking was very important. We then have a dedicated support team who support the frontline staff. And they have links back to advocacy groups for support with individual customer cases. We have a flag where we can note a customer's additional support needs. If we agree something with the customer, we can note it there. And just to be really clear, it is not a vulnerability flag. We never label a customer as vulnerable. This is about providing choice and flexibility. It's an additional support flag. We also have an additional support helpline, which is really, really useful. And again, the customer doesn't need to use it, but it's there. It's a straight through to a person, and it can be really helpful for customers, both customers and their carers. And then finally, just customer communication. I think that point was being made earlier as well, that you really, there's always a challenge there. We always have to keep communicating with our customers.
That is a very interesting perspective. And I think that there's obviously a lot to it that your customers don't see necessarily, let's say in the back end. Perhaps Benedict, your bank is the second biggest retail bank in France. So you service a huge amount of customers. And you also are a professional in this field. You work in the practice. Are there for you any golden rules, golden practices that you try to follow when working on improving banking accessibility?
Yeah, so I think the golden rule is, and it was mentioned in the previous panels, is to take care of our stakeholders. And obviously our stakeholders concerning accessibility are all the people that have difficulty in accessing our payment products. So I've created the sustainability division of payments 3 years ago. So it's not super long. And before having all stakeholders joining, we also needed to train our people. So I think it's the second golden rule. It's to make sure that on top of having, so for this case, disabled people, people visually impaired, as we discussed earlier today, it's also to make sure that our staff is trained and understands what our clients are facing. And we did that, for instance, with payment terminals. Earlier this year, together with GIE Carte Bancaire, which is a French domestic scheme, we took the acceptance team. They couldn't see, sorry, I can't find my words, but they were wearing scarves on their eyes. And it was for them to really feel the new digital payment terminals and to see how difficult it was to make the PIN code correct. And because we did that on payment terminals, they realized that we have to better accompany our merchants. So I heard what was said before, it's not the merchant to activate the accessibility mode, but I still think that if the merchant is aware that there is an accessibility mode, it's still, a step. And also to make sure that we can contact our merchant and get their feedback because when they were facing, some issues with people with difficulties of accessibility, it can also help us enhance, our the different elements of the payment cinematic. So I think those are the two golden rules that I keep when we try to implement accessibility in the payment division.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. And perhaps because you mentioned training of staff, would you say that perhaps in your bank, it is partly everyone's responsibility to think about accessibility?
Yeah, it's it needs to be, thanks to regulation also, but yeah, because I mean, obviously we are providing payment means at scale for most people that are not disabled, but we need to cater for all people, also because in our DNA, we are a mutualist group, our shareholders are our clients, and therefore it gives us an additional element of responsibility. One last thing I forgot to mention as a golden rule is something that I learned from a representative of the French Association of Visually Impaired People, is that when you do something, do it at scale, just don't do it for us. And it's a feedback we received when we were thinking of implementing the touch card with the notch. And what was said is that you need to do it at scale because we just don't want it to be done for us. And whenever we are developing something, we are trying to do it this way.
Very interesting. Do it for everyone. I love that. Sophie, going from a very broad perspective to something very practical, the digital euro. In what ways will the digital euro improve banking accessibility, and which elements matter most to you?
Yes, so accessibility is a key principle for the digital euro because central bank money needs to be accessible, available, and usable by everyone to fulfill its mission, that is to connect the different parts of the payment system. So with this in mind, our approach to accessibility really focuses on two dimensions. The first is the technical design of the digital euro, and the second is how it will be distributed. So in the technical design of a digital euro, what I can say today is that it's important to keep in mind that consumers will be able to access digital euro services via a front-end solution that will be developed by the ECB, in addition to banks' interfaces if they decide to also integrate the digital euro within their own interfaces. And so we're doing quite a lot of work to ensure that this solution will provide an optimum level of accessibility. One, I think, best practice and lesson learned from the ecosystem is that it's really important to take this into account from day zero, instead of trying to, retrofit this later on. The Digital Euro app will address physical barriers, but we're also looking at usability and cognitive accessibility. The focus is on ensuring that it's easily learnable and that transaction processes and payment processes require a low cognitive workload for users. And this will benefit all users. Second, moving on to the distribution here. So the digital euro will have to be distributed by all banks in the euro area. But the digital euro regulation also foresees that member states will have to mandate one entity in each member state to provide support services in person and in points of proximity to people who need it. And that's really key to ensure an inclusive ecosystem and ensure that people who are not confident to onboard remotely on a mobile app will receive the support they need. So we strongly believe that a human-centered ecosystem will require going beyond individual actions, and the technical design of a digital euro and effective collaboration between central banks, governments, intermediaries, and society as a whole.
Thank you. And I completely agree. You need to get it right from the start and collaborate, of course, with all kinds of stakeholders. And that brings me to you, Freddie, because Inclusion Europe gives a voice to people with intellectual disabilities and their families in the whole of Europe. And I think a big part of your work is collaboration. What do you think is the importance of collaboration between various stakeholders when working on banking accessibility?
Yeah, so we're speaking about good practices, but the best practices is just sometimes to ask people and work with them. I had lunch with Kira before, and Kira, works in Ireland with our member, Inclusion Ireland. And they had some training with Lydia. Lydia is a self-advocate, so a person with intellectual disabilities who was there and trained professionals on how to make banking services accessible. I think this is the best way to know which kind of challenges people face in everyday life, to know how it's difficult sometimes to remember PIN codes or go to ATM alone without asking a person supporting you, to know about the effect of the closing of office banks or cashless banks on people with intellectual disabilities who do not have access to human support, for example. And the example of Ireland with Lydia and Inclusion Ireland, it's a good example that has to be replicated in other countries. For example, Spain as well. So we had a lot of example from Spain, but I learned that there is a program on financial education of people there, and that our member Plena Inclusion is collaborating with the Bank Santander to make an easy to read guide on how to make financial decisions. It means how to create a bank account, how to request support at the banks, but it also means how to read an invoice or how to read your payslip. I think the final goal of this collaboration should always be empowering people, and by collaborating with them, you will be the best accessibility standards, the best collaboration with everybody, so the world is more inclusive in the end. So yeah.
That is a very clear message. Perhaps, Kira, from your perspective, are there any measures that are in your context very powerful, but of which you think that they could be translated to a very broad context so that people can take it home with them?
So, and just the point there that Freddie was making about really listening to customers is incredibly important. And what we find is that if you focus on the needs of one group of customers, you end up with solutions that benefit so many. And a kind of really good example was we worked recently with As I Am, who is an autism advocacy group, and to make sure our branches were autism friendly. And one of the things that they guided us to do was to publish a map of each branch on the internet. Now that's so useful. If somebody for many different reasons might want to know, which door is accessible, where do you turn when you go in? So a really, really useful piece. Another actually incredibly useful initiative was we introduced language translation in our branches. So this was in partnership with a company who provide over 120 languages on demand. If you think about one of the first things a person does when they come to a new country is to open a bank account. So really, really important. And I might just give one last really, really simple one. This one is incredibly simple. We encourage all of our customers to keep their day-to-day money in one account, larger amounts elsewhere. And then they can meet us, they can give us instructions. They might want to support or with them for the larger amounts. They might want us to safeguard it. And that's important across the board, but particularly important for our older customers as they plan ahead.
Thank you. And Benedict, perhaps a striking reality is that the work on banking accessibility is never done. It's good news for professionals because it means that you will have a job forever. But do you have examples?
We have money in this job.
Exactly. But do you perhaps have clear examples where over the years you still find ways to improve accessibility?
Yeah, sure. And I think it boils down to empowerment, as mentioned by Freddie. So 2 examples of our retail branches, Caisse d'Épargne. So as I don't know if you're aware, but in France, in July, we are going to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the law authorizing married women to open an account without the sign-off of their dear husband. And because we are celebrating that, it's just a note, but it leads me to think about domestic violences. And what we've put together with Caisse d'Épargne is a training of professionals about domestic violences, of the fact that women facing domestic violences sometimes need to have a separate bank account for them to have their salary being paid on this particular bank account, to have very quickly a payment card available, as well as a bank overdraft. And this is going beyond, our role as a bank. These 1,000 women in France in 2023 were victims of domestic violences can, still have access also to money in order to free them from this difficult situation. And another element is the training of, and it's a little bit as what my colleague is doing in Ireland, it's regarding people that, need to be need to evolve with someone in the family in order for them to take care of their day-to-day budget. And so what we've done is at scale, train people, also inform our retail people in the branches of what kind of measures you can offer. And we've implemented certain payment modules that can enable people that have more difficulties to manage their budget to still be independent for a certain amount on a monthly basis that is pre-approved with them and with their tutor. I don't know what's the exact word. So, and it boils down to our first point, which speaks about our training our staff and making sure that our staff, because a bank is still a social actor, are aware of the different situations that, any vulnerable people may face in their day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned going beyond your role as a bank, and I think it's a great quote that I will start using from now on. Sophie, perhaps to you, the Digital Euro project can be considered as a very innovative project, perhaps even disruptive. And from this innovation point of view, I would like to hear from you, how do you practically get the accessibility angle into the project?
Yeah, so our approach to accessibility and inclusion in general is informed by, I would say, two main areas of work, and we're really focusing on incorporating best practices into our approach. The first is user research. We've been conducting user research since the beginning of a project, but during the preparation phase, we've been doing more work focusing specifically on understanding the pain points, barriers, frictions, and frustrations experienced by consumers. We've also a specific focus on vulnerable consumers and people with disabilities. And the Euro area central banks overall identified that the need, it's important to focus on both people who can't use and people who don't know how to use. And this really emphasizes the need to look at physical barriers, cognitive barriers, but also on having appropriate communication and support channels in place, including in physical proximity. And the second area that informs our approach is our broad engagement with stakeholders. We've been engaging with the payments and the accessibility ecosystem since the early onset of the project, for example, via a dedicated workshop, the European Retail Payments Board. We will continue to do so in the future and in the next project phase. And in particular, we're looking to increase our engagement with accessibility experts and specialized associations to better understand the barriers faced by consumers and how we can incorporate these best practices and lessons learned into our approach and technical design decisions effectively.
Mm-hmm. Then perhaps a very short question to all of you. When we talk about good practices and good examples, I am wondering what makes a practice good? What makes a measure that you take successful? Are there any things that you try to keep track of when you implement something? Yeah, go ahead.
I think what I'm going to say is repeating what the developers said in the panel, one of the panel before. It's thinking beyond the law. So it's about making the experience of any users a good experience with what you have. It's about, for us, breaking down stereotypes also. If you make things accessible for them, if you provide the support, they are not going to be seen as incapable of doing something. And for example, my dream will be that the European Accessibility Act will push countries to reform their legal capacity law, showing that they can use bank services if it's accessible. So they should have the right to have a bank account. They should have the right to pay for the things that they do. And I think the European Accessibility Act could be a good tool to advocate for better laws in general in the future. So yeah, that's my take on this question.
And so for me, it's about providing customers with choice and flexibility. So what would work for one customer will not work for another. So it's just so important that those tools are provided. And then it's about engagement and engagement directly with our customers, constantly engaging, because just because you solve one problem today doesn't mean that there's not a rake of other problems behind it.
I think for me, it's obviously a matter of customer satisfaction. And, any customer you address would be satisfied, with, in our case, the payment cinematic, or, how you use the mobile app, or what are the relationships that you have with your bank, and you're satisfied with that. But another important element for me is also the pride felt by the employees, and the fact that they do realize that they contribute to something, bigger, and eventually realizing that also what you put in place at scale for, certain type of people is effectively helping others, And one example I'd like to take, which is very different from the bank. So in France, there is a big retailer, grocery retailer, that has decided for a certain period of time to stop music. When you go to supermarket, sometimes there is a lot of music. It's really annoying. And they did it for persons that had autism, and they state it, they state from like noon to 3 p.m. there won't be any music in our supermarket because of that. And I was like, I love this time, because this is annoying me, And I think that there are always measures that you put in place for others, and you put in place for people that are visually impaired, but in fact, it's going to help the elderly, because they wouldn't state it, or they would try to accommodate. So I think those are the two elements for me.
I don't know whether you want anything.
Nothing to add. I totally agree with what's been said.
Okay, perfect. Then it's time for questions of the audience. We have 4 great experts in here sitting at this table. So please don't hold back. If you want to know anything, now is the time.
Thank you. My name is Raf Rolier. I'm working for FIBELFIN, the Belgian Finance Federation. Thank you for the interesting exposure. I had a question for the banking representatives. So we see that banks are confronted with transformation. On the one hand, you have reduction in number of branches, reduction in number of ATMs, etc. On the other hand, you have the growing success of banking apps, online banking, and so on. And we saw at the same time the requests of different speakers to have a human interaction, to have a human touch. How do you see that as a banker? How do you find the right balance between online banking on the one hand and the human touch on the other hand? Thank you.
I'll take it first. Yeah. So it's true that it needs to be a mix. And as far as we are concerned, it's something we are trying to keep, because we are what we call a universal bank. So we try to address the different way of interacting with our customers. It's not the case of all. You have neobanks that have made the decision not to have, any physical presence in any streets or countries. But like just one example, so we have some fight against fraud, when you have some issues with your card, you need to call. And for some of these elements, we are using chatbots, which are optimizing also the better treatment of your query. But when we looked at the procurement and the service that would be given by a third party, my task as head of sustainability was to make sure that whenever the interaction with the bot was not good, the oral interaction, there was very quickly a shift to someone real, a real person. And I think this is our responsibility, is to make sure that, okay, you have like a way of working for like 80% of the population, but us, we are safeguarding the 20 other percent and making sure that it's going to work overall. And I mean, lucky enough we are in this kind of universal bank. Maybe it's not the case for all our peers.
Yeah, and for me, very definitely the same answer. It's we're fortunate to have the choice of channels. I think choice is incredibly important, but also really supporting customers to blend the channels they use. So a customer could be very comfortable with using a digital channel for day-to-day banking, but want to come into a branch for the larger decisions. And it's about making sure the customers understand how to do that we can meet them, we can set it up for them, and that then they can use the channel that's appropriate to them.
Any other questions?
Hi, we have a question from the chat. What good practices would you suggest for a bank to ensure that the legal documents signed by customers are accessible for people with cognitive disabilities?
I don't have any best practice on accessibility. If I understand well, the question is a document that prove to the bank that the person can make decision.
Or the bank, the documents probably for your loans, your credit card, terms and conditions, etc. I think it was,
Okay, I don't have any best practice on that, to be fairly honest with you. I have a best practice, but not related to that. We were contacted by an online banking developer some times ago to develop an app on how to adapt it to person with intellectual disabilities. And they found out a feature that personalize the experience of the user, and this can make, for example, the contact with the bank easier in the end. I don't have more details, but yes. Another thing that I know, but it's not fully related to accessibility, it's in Spain. I know that they have a kind of process to manage conflict between the customer and the bank when there is a financial risk at stake. So it's a kind of intermediary that arrange some agreements between the bank, etc., etc. So I don't have details, but I can send it to you per email. Ask our member there. So yeah, that's it.
I think there is also a big work that is to be done by banks following the entry into force of the European Accessibility Act about the B2 language, notably. So even as a banker for years, sometimes the contracts are a little bit hard to swallow, I must say. So yeah, it's effectively something that needs to be done. It's not easy because there is a lot of jargon, but anyway, we have to comply with the law. So all banks are going to work on that.
Any final questions from the audience?
Yeah, a very brief question to the two, Chiara and to Benedict. Do you think there is enough forum to exchange on best practices across borders, for example, at European level, on accessibility in the sector of banking services, or is that something that needs to be created?
I'd like to answer this one first. Answer is no. I'm particularly grateful for my colleague Fabienne, whom is in the room, whom has given my name to be invited today. And I was thinking to myself during lunch that we should also have our CEOs here, because I think this accessibility issue, I mean, for any kind of sustainability subjects, need to be voiced even more. So that's a personal view. Huh?
No, but it's a great personal view. I would love to organize that because I think it's absolutely important that if we design this, because this morning, sorry, I break into your point, but I'm passionate about this. This morning, fragmentation was one of the questions. So Anne, you're absolutely right. And this is what we need to try to avoid, because indeed, if everybody does good, but everybody does good differently, then we still make it very hard to have accessible banks there. So your question is very relevant. And I would certainly like to offer the EBF as a platform to organize exchange in any way between banking federations, banks, and stakeholders. And that's why we wanted to do today. So my apologies for.
Thank you, Wim. That's
Could I just add to that?
Definitely.
That one point. Sorry. So we have two groups in Ireland who bring the industry together and agree protocols, and the BPFI and the Irish Bank and Culture Board. And it's incredibly powerful to have a protocol agreed across an industry, because of what it does, it makes it a lot easier to communicate with customers. So customers then know how to access the services.
Yeah, and a note, it's the same in France.
Yeah.
So obviously under the leadership of FBF and other entities, we would have the same across French banks. But I think the matter was also the scale across Europe. And probably, yeah, this is the bit that is a little bit more messy.
Freddie, any final comments from your side, or Sophie? No additions? Okay, perfect. Then is there time for one more question? Yes, there is. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's a very, very fast comment because I'm from Ingenico as well, so device manufacturer. Some kind of, well, common response from the banks would be amazing, because for us, it would also be much easier to implement standards or measures and not being sometimes at the source of it. So it would be amazing if something could be done like this. Or even if CEOs came, that could be great as well to push towards the.
Great. Then I think that brings us to the end of this debate. Thank you very much. And please join me in thanking the 4 great experts on this panel.